Hello, and welcome to the second in this mini-series on communications, getting your message across through the media. In this interview, we're going to concentrate on, yes, interviews themselves. Business people are often very nervous about giving media interviews on behalf of their company, and partly because sometimes their spokespeople do mess it up. But giving great answers to journalists is a learnable skill, and we're going to focus on this with one-time journalist Michael Dodd, author of Great Answers to Tough Questions at Work, which has received Management Gold Award from the Chartered Institute of Managers. Michael says that if you have people in your high-tech company who learn how to give the media what they need in a fascinating way, then it's a splendid opportunity to get positive, free publicity for your business. And he joins me now. Hello, Michael.
Great to be here, David.
Thank you for coming. And so what is your key to getting the message across through the media?
Well, the number one thing is to have a message. And the danger is if you don't have something in your head, we talk about having a headline message in your head when you're interviewed, you can end up being what I call being a prisoner of the questions. And that often happens with tough programs like BBC's Newsnight, for example, or Hard Talk that goes around the world. And if you're going onto a program like that, then you need to have some positive things to say so that you're actually seeing the opportunity behind the crisis of tough negative questions, which journalists often, and I used to be one, like to ask.
So with your experience in journalism, you're able to give the kind of technique that is necessary to handle these kind of questions and to get the message across in the right way through the media. Would you say there's a particular difference between, for example, the way you might handle the print media and the way you might handle radio or TV? Is that?
Yeah, no, it's important to appreciate that distinction between a broadcast interview where the journalists and the producers are looking for a bit of drama, which is often why you have someone like the infamous Jeremy Paxman, who used to sort of like snarl at ministers of the Crown while they were answering questions, and they're after a bit of theatre, a bit of theatrics. And so you've got to play to that, and you've got to make sure if you are being broadcast on TV or radio, you have a bit of emotional punch behind your answers, and also realise that it is a bit of a game, that they're going to try and find your weak spot or try and find your Achilles heel, and it's not the end of the world. You've got to get across that positive message off the back of it while dealing with the question. Now, if it's a print interview or any interview for the written word, so it could be for a news website, and that's something that techie companies get a lot of invitations to do, then it'll be a less theatrical affair typically. And so it's much more laid back. It's closer to being like a real life conversation. The danger of that interview for the written word is that you don't have that drama and theatrics, and you can fall into the trap of thinking, oh, it's just like a normal conversation at the coffee shop or down the pub, and say things that you wouldn't otherwise say if you had the audience for reading that publication top of your mind. So the trick is to, in all cases, for broadcast and non-broadcast, is be prepared and be ready to get on the front foot, but don't fall into a false sense of security that it's just a cozy little chat.
So be prepared is really the big learn on.
Yeah,
that you must
it's
have.
amazing how people often don't realise that, often very important people at the top of companies, and they'll say, oh, I'm going on the BBC World Service with people listening around the world, or Disruptive.Live with lots of viewers out there, and they'll say something like, I hope they ask me the right questions. And you shouldn't be having that approach.
Yes.
You want to be ready for the tough questions as well as the soft questions, and make sure whatever is thrown at you, that you get across a positive message that you plan for, prepare for, and practice for every time.
So on this topic of the right questions or not the right questions, I guess the other big area that you have to be prepared for and strategically prepared for too is crisis, is communications when something's gone wrong with the company, with your team, with with the brand. You have to protect the brand as well.
Well, you do. You have to be very mindful of that.
Yeah.
And so if you're there representing a company, whether you're the boss or whether you're just the official spokesperson or on the PR side of the business, you know, everything you do influences the brand. And so you know, you can do really well and increase the prestige of your brand, or the opposite. There was a guy who was on TV in Britain who was from a house building company, and he was asked about a massive pay rise that he and his colleagues had awarded him, and he wasn't expecting it. He was at the opening of a brick factory, and he walked out of the interview. And then off camera, but still on microphone, said, you know, complained about the question, which is the kind of question that a journalist feels as though it's their job to ask.
Yes.
He wasn't prepared for it, so it obviously had a tarnishing effect on the brand of the company. So when you have a crisis, there's two kinds. There's kinds like that one where you create your own crisis, which hopefully our viewers will be wise enough not to do. But there's also cases where something does go wrong, and you've got to handle it in the way you deal with the media, in a way that both tells the truth, but gets across whatever positives there are. Normally, if you look hard enough, whatever has gone wrong, there will be a positive somewhere, and you need to get that across.
Because in this technology sector, for example, but in many other sectors, the possibility of disruptive change and disruption, and we're talking now about Disruptive.Live, the possibility of disruption is there all the time. So in a sense, you've got to be always prepared.
Well, one of the things that I do when I'm training people in companies to deal with media interviews is to be ready for the kind of obvious questions like, you know, what does your product do? What's good about your service? But also to be ready for what happens if something goes terribly wrong. And it can happen with any brand. Example I could tell you about is one that I've written about in the book, Great Answers to Tough Questions at Work, and it's from Sir Richard Branson, head of Virgin.
Yes.
And I personally haven't media trained him, but I have it on fairly good authority that he's been trained, and he was in a crisis situation for the Virgin brand when one of his trains crashed in northern England. An old lady was killed, dozens of people were injured. He was on holidays in Italy at the time, which wasn't very helpful, but he did the right thing for the company, for the brand. He flew straight back and he appeared by the railway tracks where the crash happened.
Yes.
And that's where the media had gathered.
Yes.
And that was the sort of hairy-chested, honourable thing to do.
Right.
He could have stuck away somewhere else and been interviewed, but he went to the site, so there was a crumpled up Virgin train in the background, so looked bad, but he obviously put his training into action, and he managed to get positive points about Virgin across off the back of a fatal train collision, which was pretty clever. But he also showed empathy and for those who were injured and things like that. But he still protected the brand in quite an amazing way.
So that's really a lesson for all of us, that that crisis can happen at any time, that we need to be prepared, and that a crisis is a crisis. You've got to be there, take responsibility. I think that's
well, he did that, and what was really clever about what he did, which because part of this is about how you sort of deliver your answers, and he didn't look in any way complacent.
Yes.
You know, he actually looked a bit shaken, and as you would be if you're in charge of a company and you know, one of your trains has crashed. But he got across the fact that the train was built like, it was one of those Italian Appalachian tilting trains, built like a tank, he said. And he actually used a negative word, which I don't normally advise, but he kind of got away with it. He said something about, you know, if it hadn't been this train built like a tank, that the death toll could have been horrendous. Now, I wouldn't normally advise using a word like horrendous, but he did use it, but it was in a positive sense. And you were thinking, well, thank goodness for Virgin Trains, I'll go on one tomorrow. And that's pretty good off the back of really bad publicity. So, you know, something can happen at any time with your brand, and you want to be, you know, planned, prepared and practiced. And I suppose the key thing is that you need to realize it is a learnable skill. You can learn how to handle it as Sir Richard did.
Yeah, an absolute object lesson. So thank you, Michael. That's it for this session. Join us again to be guided through the maze of communications challenges, and look out for the rest of this mini-series on Disruptive Live.